And at times, the color and the light would be so intense, and it was like bubbling up in my head. It was like this golden light. It was just exploding, and I had to put a lid on it. It felt like if I had laughed at that point, or if I'd even giggled, I would have exploded.
I started to feel this rising sensation. And it started rising, 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 almost like an elevator feeling. And then all of a sudden, I could see this tiny hole. And it was like my consciousness was being drawn into that. And all of a sudden, I burst into the universe. And everything was vibrating. I knew I was vibrating. And so I closed my eyes again, and then it started to happen again.
Kundalini is spiritual energy, the energy of consciousness, which is thought to reside at the base of the spine of every human body. And when aroused, it brings new states of consciousness, including mystical illumination, exalted powers, ecstasy, bliss, clairvoyance, healing, and transcendence of self. Everything in the universe is energy. This source of energy, when utilized properly, can end suffering, increase health, bring blissful experiences, loving relationships, and spiritual and psychic gifts.
So we are just a microcosm of that supreme energy.
There's a super intelligent life energy everywhere, of which we are all a part, which acts in all of us, has an intelligence or a consciousness that is beyond what, at the moment, what we can perceive.
Kundalini is the source of power that the world's most beloved artists, composers, poets, and writers may have tapped into. Many philosophers harnessed this power within.
Many people have had that experience, myself as well, of this living sense and experience of the energy manifesting as this scintillating blue light.
Changes, however, are not always easy, and as we undergo this transformation, we may experience much phenomena unfamiliar to us. Some of these are wonderful, some can be terrifying. Spontaneous awakening of Kundalini can be dangerous due to a lack of understanding, and if the body is not attuned to allow the flow of this supreme energetic force, it can cause mental and emotional imbalance and physical discomfort. Why has information about Kundalini not spread to the mainstream yet? What is needed to recognize this power within you? This secret has been kept hidden for centuries. However, Kundalini is within every human, a resource of energy that, when fully awakened, allows us to reach our full potential with joy, peace, and unconditional love.
I had an injury to my lower back. The third vertebrae was herniated disc, I should say, during a ski accident back in 1993. And I had this hot flash just right up my spine. It didn't result in any hospitalization or anything of that nature, but I ended up having to go to physical therapy for quite some time. And about 3 weeks after that, I started having an incredible amount of emotional upheavals starting within me, and it started just basically deconstructing my life. I was just overcome by an overwhelming sense of sadness. Nothing meant anything anymore. And I remained in that state for probably about 2 years, during which time I was seeing a psychiatrist who decided that medication was the best route to take, which didn't help anything. It actually made things worse. It just, as soon as I impacted just a pulse of energy that felt really incredibly hot, it just raced up I didn't feel it enter into my head or anything, but it just raced up the spine and then stopped. And my back was hot for days after that.
In 1975, I had a near-death experience after 5.5 hours of spinal surgery and waking up in a striker frame circle bed. About 3 days after surgery, I remember waking up and having this huge belly. My whole body had swelled up. I had developed an ileus. But people were rushing in with carts, with bottles and machinery and tubes, and hooking me up to all kinds of stuff. And I remember I was so terrified that I just blanked out. And the next thing I knew, and I have to tell you, I was an atheist at this point. I considered myself a very sophisticated atheist. And yeah, I had been abused a lot as a child, which had really just turned me off. And I was numb. And I woke up out in the hallway, and it was the middle of the night. And I looked up and down the hall, and I didn't see anybody, but I thought, and the lights were dim, and there was nobody around in the hospital hallway. And I thought, well, if they catch me out here, I'm going to get into trouble, because I'm supposed to be suspended in that bed. So I turned around to come back into the room, and I was looking directly into a PA speaker. Now, I knew that PA speaker was mounted on the ceiling. So that's when I realized something was wrong, something was up, and it was me. I was up at the ceiling. And I came back into the room, and I looked down into the circle bed, and I saw her. She had tape wrapped around her nose to hold the tube down my throat into my stomach, and they had all kinds of bags hanging. And I looked at her, and it certainly wasn't me. The part of me that was looking at her, that was me. And I stayed like that for a little while, and I remember thinking that this was the first time in my life I had felt peaceful, that I felt calm and peaceful. And as I connected with that, I started moving through something very dark that I couldn't call a tunnel for years, not until I became a researcher. And I thought, yeah, I guess tunnel is the best word for it. But again, words can't really explain the actual experience. But I'm moving through something that's very dark, and I'm studying what I'm seeing, and I'm seeing light churning in the darkness. It's like the total darkness was bringing light out of it, or the light was coming out of the darkness, and it was moving ahead of me. And as I was watching this, I felt these arms come around me and embrace me and pull me into this lush warmth. And it was my grandmother. I called her Bubby. My Bubby had been dead for 14 years, and I had never once thought of her existing beyond her death. I mean, this was not anything I believed, but I knew I was with her. And she held me, and together we re-experienced the 19 years we were together on this planet. And I didn't just experience it from my perceptions, I experienced it from hers. I could see everything she was seeing, I could feel everything she was feeling, and I had every thought that she had. So together, what we were doing was showing each other how much love we had given each other. It was incredible, and because my grandmother was giving me the attention that I needed, I wasn't getting it from my parents. And this went on until we got to the point where she had passed away. And as I watched her dying, I started moving away from her. But it was okay that I was moving away from her, because I knew that there was these transmissions between us with no words, but heart to heart. I knew she'd always be waiting for me in that tunnel, okay? And then I was back in my body, back in the bed. And I tried to tell some people that came in on the healthcare team I left the bed. I didn't tell them what I just told you. It took me a long time to find words for it. But I did tell them I left the bed, and they kept telling me it was impossible, that I couldn't leave the bed, that I had hallucinated. And the more I would protest, the more they would sedate me.
Symptoms of out-of-body experiences, or OBEs, and Kundalini are close first cousins and may eventually lead from one to the other. In the OBE, a person can learn that they are more than their physical body. They may learn of multiple planes of existence and of multiple expressions of consciousness. With Kundalini, a person can learn all of these things and, in addition, the implications of a conscious form of physical divinity residing inside an unlimited yet physical body.
And a year after the physical therapy, I realized I couldn't go back to being the way I was before. I mean, we had a swimming pool, we had an airplane, we had everything imaginable materialistically, and it just was so hollow for me now. I loved my 3 kids, I still did brownies and Cub Scouts, but I couldn't go back to the way I was before. So what I did was I went back to the hospital where I had been, and I started working in the emergency room just as a volunteer. But if people were brought in, I would know if they were dying, and I would just touch them or hold their hands. And when this would happen, the staff knew they didn't have to send me to do anything else. They wouldn't ask me to run errands. I'd be sitting there for an hour holding somebody's hand who was dying. And that felt so good. And that's when the Kundalini symptoms started happening. I would get so excited that I was going to go into the hospital to work, which started off being 1 day and then 3 days, and then I realized I had to go back to school. But I would get so excited I would get a migraine. And of course they couldn't find anything wrong with my brain. I had an EEG, all that stuff, there was nothing. But as soon as I would get my hands on somebody who was dying, I could feel my headache draining down my arms, and it would come out through my palms, not hurt pain anymore, but a tingling.
Kundalini is a natural part of being human. It is an aspect of the human being that works like an electrical capacitor to a small degree. When a certain amount of energy or a condition warrants its release into the body, an extreme transformation ensues. Very powerful energy that isn't electrical will release into the body. This can be triggered by an accident to the tailbone, or by extreme meditation, or extreme prayer, or by severe emotional duress. It can also be activated by practices intended for its release, or by a person who has it already flowing strongly within. Kundalini is a Sanskrit word meaning coiled up. There are many other names for this energy from almost every culture on earth. Greater Khan and Li from China, Holy Fire from the Christian mystics, Lung of the Tibetans, Tumo Fire of the Buddhists, and Sufi latifas infused with zikr in Islam. For thousands of years, Kundalini experiences have been described in the esoteric teachings of Hindus, Egyptians, Tibetans, Chinese, Native Americans, shamans, the Bushmen of Africa. The ancient Hindu yoga practitioners kept a concise and detailed map of the symptomology of Kundalini.
And as soon as we come out of the womb, we start being told, you're my son, you're going to be this. You're my daughter, you're going to do that. You're a girl, you can't do this. You're a boy, you better not do that. Layer upon layer upon layer of identity. Layer upon layer that has to be shed in order for us to come back to knowing what our real nature is. And that's what Kundalini does. The science of yoga describes, in a sense, the cycle of a soul's journey across many lifetimes as having, in a sense, 2 components of it. One is called savritti. It's the taking on of forms. It's the soul that's just looking for more experience, pursued desires, all these kinds of things. And that builds more karmas and more things you have to do, and on and on and on like that. At some point, the soul goes, this game is kind of tiresome. There's just so much pleasure to be had through the senses, through relationships, through consuming this or that. I vaguely remember being a part of something huge and whole and complete and full that didn't require anything to come in.
When we had a bit of a longer meditation session is when I had this experience. And I could, once I started to meditate, and then I felt in the solar plexus area a turning sensation and a pain. And at first I thought, am I going to be ill? Because that's the only action, other than normal digestion that I'd really ever had. And I felt like I was kind of rocking a little bit back and forth. And then all of a sudden there was this explosion of light, inner light. And with my eyes closed, I could see over my head what I perceived as the Star of David. Now, I wasn't from the Jewish tradition, and I was surprised, to be honest with you, by that. And at the same moment that that light came up to my head, and I saw that star, I heard the words, "All men are created equal." And then when I was walking home at the end of the session, I could see me coming toward me. In other words, I just saw myself. Not necessarily totally as I look, but just brighter, with a little bit of light interwoven in the features and so on. I wasn't scared, it didn't bother me. I just thought to myself, well, I've finally met myself.
And you know, in Eastern traditions, Kundalini is seen as the goddess, so it's a form of the divine feminine.
According to Hindu tradition, Kundalini Shakti, or the divine feminine energy, who resides at the base of the spine in the first chakra, slowly makes her ascent up the spine when she has been awakened. Her role as divine energy is to travel to the crown chakra at the top of the head to unite with her beloved, Shiva, the divine masculine energy or pure consciousness, who is inert until the sacred circuit is completed. Shakti's duty is to purify the individual in the soul body, physical body, mental body, psychological body, emotional body, as she ascends, giving us her blessings to evolve to our maximum potential. Kundalini nourishes the tree of life within us and is coiled up like a serpent, and therefore it is called the serpent power. Christians called it a reflection of the Holy Ghost. The Old Testament symbol becomes significant in Christianity when Christ suggests Kundalini awakening. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even as the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life. The caduceus, held by Roman god Mercury, with one or two coiled serpents entwined around the staff, represents Kundalini, which rises along the central, subtle channel in a spiral movement. The Lord Buddha spoke of the middle path to achieve nirvana. He was actually describing the central channel, Sushumna, through which the Kundalini ascends, from the root chakra to the crown chakra. In the Holy Quran, Prophet Muhammad Sahib talked of the day of resurrection when he says that the hands will speak. When Kundalini awakening occurs, a flow of energy in the form of cool vibrations from the hands is experienced, and the various chakras can be felt on parts of the hands and fingers. Shekinah, the radiance of God, is the Hebrew concept of Kundalini Shakti. It is a feminine Hebrew word meaning the dwelling or settling, and is used to denote the dwelling or settling presence of God.
I dived pretty deep into heavy drinking and drug use. And that was more to nullify the emotional pain. Didn't make things better though. Made things much worse, brought up a lot more negativity within myself. I think circumstances are being developed behind the scenes to move us apart. You know, my life has been incredibly hard. And I want nothing more than a connection with the divine. and my current partner doesn't agree that that's what life is for, you know?
From there, my marriage was falling apart. My husband really wanted me to go back to being the way I was. And I mean, the way I was meant I had to go back on Valium to suppress who I was, and I wasn't willing anymore. My soul was coming out, and I wasn't putting it back in and pushing it down. We started dating when I was 14 and he was 17. We were going steady at 14 and 17, and he wanted me to go back to the way I was when I was 14. You know, and like I said, that meant a lot of Valium. I wanted to grow, I wanted to change, and change was a dirty word. So we just went further and further and further apart. My parents could not figure me out at all. You know, they stood way off in a distance and looked at me like, who is she? I don't know her. I really couldn't find any blood relatives that I could commune with anymore, and that was very sad. My friends, I have none of the friends I had back then. My husband still does. They're still together. And it, you know, this didn't happen overnight. It took me 9 years to say I need a divorce, because I kept trying and trying and trying. It's like I knew from that experience the way it's supposed to be, and I just kept trying to tell him the way it's supposed to be. And nobody wants to hear that. They haven't had the experience I've had. They want it to keep going the way it is. So yeah, it was really, really, really distant. That's why I went back to school and became a respiratory therapist, because then I could work with dying people. And when you're working with dying people, there is such honesty.
You have to die to the ego. And ego dies in surrender. It's not a literal death, it's an absolute surrender. So that the ordinary ego mind that seems to master and control and boss us around and drive us to buy this, own that, have this, go out with this person, whatever, we have to die to that in a certain way.
People understand the normal sequential development of the soul. And you can't short circuit this development sequence, because it won't work. And that's the reason why some people go through a partial awakening and then it goes away. Or they'll go through an awakening and then all of a sudden you see their ego get real big as they start to look what experience I had.
That happens in so many spiritual traditions and types of transformative experience. We finally let go of the ego. And then we're flooded with grace, and total transformation can occur.
The 3 steps are dependency, which is when a child is born, they have surrendered their authority to their parent. They are totally dependent on the parent. That then decreases, and then the child develops self-identity, which I joke right in here is the 16-year-old, hire the 16-year-old while they still know it all. Then they have self-identity or self-worship, the look who I am. And they think they are in control, they are not dependent on someone else. Then is the next transition phase, which is the diminishing of the ego or midlife crisis. This is when bad things start to happen. And the ego says, wait a minute, if I were in control, bad things wouldn't happen. And that is the beginning of the diminishing of the self. Now, as self diminishes, as it comes down here, this period right in here, this transition, would be the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul is when the self is empty. In Christianity, that's when Paul talked about the dying daily. In other words, the self must die. And the reason is because if you're full of yourself, you have no room for the divine. So that just as validation is what helps a person build their self-identity, love is what helps a person build their divine identity. A soul must go through this sequence. Now, the reason that near-death experiences accelerate the process so much is because it instantaneously destroys the ego. It creates an instantaneous surrender. So once you've gone through that instantaneous surrender, you can experience God immediately.
Gopi Krishna, born in 1903 near Kashmir in northern India, was one of the first people to popularize the concept of Kundalini among Western readers. He was a government office clerk and practiced prolonged meditations for a number of years. In 1937, At the age of 34, while meditating one morning, he experienced the sudden and forceful awakening of Kundalini.
Well, he was meditating. He had taken up the practice of meditation in his own life. And I think he was doing it, as far as I understand, without the help of a guru on a regular basis. He was extremely dedicated to the practice. He meditated faithfully every day for 17 years, including his, as he said, including his wedding night. So he knew his wife was going to be very understanding, and very supportive.
One day in winter, about the time of Christmas, I was meditating early in the morning, when suddenly I found something giving way in my brain, as if a new aperture had opened, and I felt an energy rising up from my spinal cord. At first I was terrified, and my attention went to the sensation caused by the energy. The moment my sensation went towards it, the vision ceased. Then I again concentrated, and ultimately I managed to keep my attention at the crown of my head, while the energy rose upward and upward through the spinal cord to the neck and then into the brain. And then I suddenly found that a stream of silvery light was pouring into my brain. There was a sound like thunder or like a waterfall in my ears, and the noise grew louder and louder and louder. At the same time, I began to expand. I cannot describe to you exactly what I mean by this, but it seemed that my consciousness was now gaining a wider and wider space, and I was leaving my body behind and projecting myself, spreading myself all around in the universe.
He had a bit of a difficult time for a number of years, not only assimilating the experience as to what it meant, but also the effect it had on his body physically, on his psyche physically as well. And in the course of those years, I believe it was about 12 years, he meticulously observed how the energy was moving in his body, and what happened to him also in his daily life in terms of spontaneous creative abilities like the writing of poetry and so on. He came to the conclusion from that the experience he had was parallel to or the same as the experience of some of the great mystics and geniuses of the past. And from that, he put together the idea that this Kundalini energy, if you will, was the energy that's driving evolution, the evolution of human consciousness to the next stage, if you will. Because it's an evolutionary energy, it's working in everyone. And so people can have spontaneous experiences even if they don't have a spiritual practice. If they have a spiritual practice, they may have an experience sooner rather than later, or in some cases they may not have it at all. Gopi Krishna felt that there was also a hereditary component to this, that somehow the body, the nervous system, had to be in a certain state of, just going to say the certain state of health, but not maybe health as we understand it. It had to be ready, I guess, or if you will, he used to use the term, it had to be ripe for the experience. Because there's, thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that meditate. They're loving, truthful, honest people that don't necessarily see that vision or have a taste of that mystical state that is really the glory of the Kundalini experience.
Before his death in 1984, at the age of 81, he wrote 17 books on higher consciousness.
He started to write poetry in languages he never spoke or read. Creative geniuses often say that, well, you know, I just saw it. You know, it just came to me. It was kind of dropped in my lap, and that's how Gopi Krishna used to talk about it. It was like this information would pass through his interior field of vision, and if he didn't write it down somehow or dictate it to somebody as it was happening, that was it. It was gone. And usually it came so fast that he couldn't get it all at once, and so there were missing words or missing phrases or whatever, and then he'd have to think on it on his own to see maybe the pattern that was there or whatever it is and make it fit and make it and work it out.
He also started a social organization that was devoted to helping the disadvantaged community, especially with regard to issues concerning the well-being and rights of women.
The energy, when it moves in you, starts to tune you up, is maybe a good way of putting it. In some cases, the tuning up can be rather rough. In Gopi Krishna's case, I guess because it was a very strong experience, and he had aggressively done this meditation, and I guess his body really wasn't totally prepared for it. There was enough in the heredity enabled him to eventually get through the experience without getting into some real serious difficulties. Oddly enough, he felt, and he's written it in many places, that what saved him as he went through this experience and had the trials and tribulations of it was the charitable work he had done in his life, which you can also call, he received grace. Okay? That was the key at the end of the day. The meditation, well, of course it helped because it helped open up the channel, but that if he hadn't done that to help other human beings, he really felt that maybe he wouldn't have made it.
His main thrust over the years was to write about mystical experience and the evolution of consciousness from a scientific point of view. Traveling extensively in Europe and North America, he dedicated his life to promoting the scientific study of Kundalini and developing the Kundalini hypothesis.
He wanted science to investigate it for a couple of reasons. Number one was that the world as it is and the way we are at the moment, if it sort of gets a stamp of approval that it's scientifically approved or there's been research done or it's been investigated, then there's something to it. Of course, you know, the experience for the individual is subjective. There are some similarities between experiences, some changes that may happen to the individual. Some of these changes can be perceived over time, but it's not like you can put it in a little package and say, there it is, this is it, touch it, you know, put your finger on it. You feel it, but if somebody else hasn't had that experience and they don't feel it's valid, it's very difficult to share it with them. You know, it's been, of course, known as indescribable or ineffable. So he wanted science to investigate it for that, in the sense that if there was an investigation, it would also get a lot of publicity. Then people might also become interested in learning about it even beforehand, and then if they had a spontaneous experience, it may save them, you know, some of the difficulties.
Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein are among the many eminent scientists who have had an interest in and an appreciation for religious and esoteric thought and experience. In Newton's case, he wrote extensively on the subject of alchemy, and in the early 1690s, apparently devoted more time to alchemy than all his other pursuits. Einstein expressed his appreciation by proclaiming, "I maintain that cosmic religious feeling is the strongest and noblest incitement to scientific research." He further explains that the scientist's religious feeling takes the form of a rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection.
I once asked Gopikrishna how long did he think we as a species would inhabit the earth. His mind-boggling reply was that human beings would continue to live on this planet for about 4 million years longer. During this unimaginable length of time, we will, of course, colonize other planets, he said. But our species will dwell on Earth for about as long as our sun continues to shine, which by some estimates is about 4 million years more. If that's the case, I asked, why then are you so keen on launching a scientific investigation of Kundalini now? Because, he said, it is the safest and most effective way to rid the world of the overhanging threat of a nuclear war. To my way of thinking, that is what distinguishes an illuminated yogi from an ordinary person. He or she becomes a spiritual genius and a prophet, able to see into the future, both near and far. And because a spiritual genius or an illuminated genius can see into the future, such men and women are essential for our survival in the atomic age.
Another part to it is, I believe he was sure in himself that this investigation would bring out some surprises for the scientific community in terms of what their theories are about consciousness, about the mind, about the brain, and about the evolution of consciousness. And that's how science has advanced usually. There's a contradiction somewhere. Whatever the theory is they have, they come to a bit of a roadblock and they can't explain that. So he was convinced of that, and a good example of that in the last 10 or 15 years anyway is the concept of neuroplasticity, where the neurons in the brain can make different connections and can lead to changes in how the brain functions in the individual. 25 years ago, science believed, well, the brain, that was it. It was fixed for life, and that's all you got. So there's a good example right there, that's current.
And there hasn't been a scientific investigation into the phenomenon of Kundalini, nor has there been any meaningful research into consciousness. Why not? Because it is not possible to understand consciousness without first investigating and coming to know something more about the phenomenon of Kundalini. At present, we have only Gopikrishna's inner explorations to go by. But his observations cannot be accepted by science until and unless they are verified by experimentation. And for this kind of research to be taken up by science, Gopikrishna's theories need to be widely discussed and debated first. For example, if a certain practice of meditation were to culminate in the production of an Einstein or a Plato, right before the eyes of leading scientists, they would readily acknowledge the efficacy of the discipline. And then there would be thousands of emulators, all fired up with the hope of attaining to the same extraordinary state of cosmic consciousness. Then all the resources of science would be mobilized to gain more and more insight into this state. This concept would put a different complexion on religion also. It would have to be conceded that the whole race is evolving in the same direction, the direction followed by the great sages and prophets of the past, and that it has to achieve the same goal. It also has to be admitted then that what we call miraculous or supernatural or paranormal phenomena might be the outcome of laws that rule the spiritual world or the forces compounding it, of which we have no real awareness at present.
People don't realize that just as the anatomy and physiology of the physical body is the same no matter what your religion, the anatomy and physiology of the soul is the same no matter what your religion. So if you were to compare, for example, Saint Teresa of Avila's interior castle and her Christian writings from the 15th century about her Kundalini awakening, if you were to put that side by side with Gopi Krishna's description of his Kundalini awakening, they are both saying the same thing. And that's what's really neat, because no matter what your religion is, it is the same thing.
It all came out of the study of yogis and advanced meditators, Zen meditators, that they had abilities and capacities to change how their body, their mind, their brain worked in ways that conventional Western medicine said was impossible. And the methods and techniques that are employed in yoga were originally discovered through the actions of awakened Kundalini. What we think of yoga postures in the West, the Hatha Yoga asanas, they were first observed and continue to be observed in people who have awakened Kundalini. They may go through some of these postures quite spontaneously. Well, we're already studying that Hatha Yoga and other things related to breath work and mindfulness have very good health benefits, and that are very important for all of society in terms of changing cardiovascular health, decreasing stress that exacerbates all kinds of medical conditions. So it would be a very fruitful way of being able to pursue what of the many Kundalini-related techniques, insights from the ancient sages of the Eastern tradition would have medical benefits today. We're in the earliest stages of infancy of the research, because research takes money, and money goes after legitimate problems. There's not enough belief or understanding about Kundalini, so I think there's a lot of intermediary steps that are being built, because there is money that's getting funded, research being funded on, for instance, mindfulness-based relaxation kinds of stress management exercises, meditation. There's meditation research being done. There's certain, forms of yoga starting to be researched. The crunch in health dollars makes it very important that we discover ways to support wellness. It's much more cost-effective to support a person's wellness than to try and treat a chronic condition. So it's going to be more effective to try and do research and show that, well, a yoga lifestyle is going to be healthier. When you look at a country, for instance, China, that has such a huge population, and yet you'll see in, every city, people doing things like Tai Chi in the morning, whole hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of people, millions of people across the country. And that's been promoted. We need to have that kind of philosophy. We need to have in the West the idea of what do we do to promote optimal health, optimal well-being. And yoga kinds of practices can really support that. They have a tremendous amount to give in that way. That will be building bridges towards then being able to do research on sort of the more esoteric levels of yoga, things related to Kundalini and energy and that.
People will follow society's rules not out of fear of consequences and legalism, but out of love for mankind. Same rules, not one dot is removed, but you follow them out of love. And the reason is because as consciousness grows, if you were to be able to see an individual soul is about the average, some are greater. The average is about 15 feet out from the physical body, or about 30 feet in diameter. That's at its smallest. As consciousness raises, it expands, and it gets greater and greater. So you have all these people whose consciousness is focused down here at the lower level. Think of a V and their consciousness is at the bottom. They view everyone else as separate from them and life is a competition. But as your consciousness raises up, you start to realize these V's overlap. And you start to realize that that other person's consciousness is within yours. So you start to develop some altruism. And as you get to a higher level of consciousness, you realize that everyone exists within the same unified consciousness. So if I cause harm to you, I'm causing harm to myself.
Well, I would expect that there is going to be more individuals being seen as having these kinds of symptoms, looking beyond the psychopathology that is often these things are characterized as, and looking for some help of saying, wait a minute, this has to do with transcendent states. We need to have the kind of psychology, and we do in terms of like transpersonal psychology, that says these kinds of states aren't pathological. These are enlightened states. These are optimal states. These are transcendent states. People need to learn how to integrate those so that they don't become dysfunctional, but it's a sign that that's a possibility. And how do we develop the kinds of treatment paradigms, places that help people integrate these experiences?
The thing to be aware of, though, that in this process right here, where this person can go back here, there is a process that for a person going through it, it's very difficult for them to identify it. And it's what I call the false Kundalini process, or the false born again. It's a fairly easy process if I were ruthless and wanted to, control people, to lead them through it. What it is, it's a mind control technique. It's really simple. It's done quite often in charismatic churches, where you, step one, allow the volume of your voice to go up and down. Step two, tell a sad story, happy story, knock a person's emotional consciousness off balance. Step three, induce guilt, fear, or anger. Step four, offer them a way to get rid of that. They will swear on a Bible they are born again. It has absolutely nothing to do with religion. It is a mind control game. It's actually a stage hypnosis induction technique. This also applies to the Kundalini process. It's totally false, and where it is so dangerous is the pitfall is that instead of you surrendering to the divine, which is what takes a person up this slope, this person surrenders their authority to another human being. This is true on an individual basis on the spiritual path. It's also true on a greater basis in society. For example, the Germans, the Prussians, were very proud people prior to World War I. They were up here. But they lost the war. That put them down here. At the same time, there was the flu epidemic of 1918. At the same time, there was famine. So the people were in a terrible place. If you look at Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it was the base layer that they were looking for: food, shelter, security, things that give comfort. So what ended up happening? They looked for someone to surrender their authority to, and that set the stage for the leader that led them into World War II. Or 2,000 years ago, the Jews were a very proud society, but they were defeated by the Romans. They were down here. They were looking for a king, someone to surrender their authority to. And along came this guy, and they tried to make him their king, and he said, no, 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 but I will teach you how to get from here to here. Right there is what the New Testament is about. If I must brag, let me brag of my faults. The humble, the meek shall inherit the kingdom. In other words, diminish the self. The dark night of the soul, which is right in here. And what is the most important commandment? Love, which is what brings you up here.
The true language of love is silence. family, friends, employers, country, state, and city. All of your life can be continued and expressed within the parameters of walking a higher path. Much of this path will be unique to you and your circumstances in life. You will be given what you need to flourish. Your job is to surrender to those surprising gifts and experiences that will typically come your way. You will need to source yourself and make your own decision.
Basically, what we all have to do is understand and realize that the mystics that came in the past and the advice they gave, which is passed down basically in the religious scriptures about the mode of life that we lead, is key. There's obviously, diet, general physical health, and so on, but the mental health of the person, in the sense of how we think, how we behave, to develop compassion, understanding, and love, is the key for a healthy process and a healthy human race.
Everyone should stop and ask themselves, why am I doing what I'm doing? What's my purpose? What's the meaning of what I'm chasing in life? Whether it be my identity as a parent with a dozen children, whether it be a pile of wealth or pension funds, what is the purpose of what I am doing? And what is my purpose for being here? Because by asking the right questions, the answers will come to you.
Every one of us has to build a better person. That's how the world is going to, in my mind, survive. You can't legislate it. You can't do it by force. It has to bloom, and it will bloom. Kundalini is also considered to be the guardian of evolution. So a higher consciousness or cosmic consciousness isn't just an experience for a short period of time. At the end of the day, we're supposedly going to live in it like we live now, except with that glory and that love and that awe and a perception that generally we don't have at the moment.
I worked as an estate planner for years with very wealthy people, and the first question I asked them was, how much are you worth 3 minutes after you're dead? What good is your wealth, is what I'm saying. It's a tool. It is not your mission.
So the intellect is there to help us develop a lifestyle where we can take advantage of it and develop ourselves spiritually. But what's happening in general is we're not spending that time that way. Okay? We're either working harder to make more money, or we're kind of, just goofing around doing something. And that's okay. We should have fun. Life is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be joyful. But we have to have a balance.
If people will pursue their highest nature, that is the way to pursue the unfolding of Kundalini. Pursue your highest nature as a loving, compassionate, generous, kind human being. Pursue your ability to serve others with that kind of attitude. And you will be fully pursuing the Holy Spirit, the Kundalini, however you want to call it. And it will become alive and present in you.
You have mysticism on one side, if you will, or religion, and you have empirical science on the other, and they meet a little bit, but there's things that one can do for the other and vice versa. And that, I think, we need to focus on a little bit more in this time. Technology can give us the time to meditate. We don't have to be afraid of being attacked by wild animals all the time. We have conveniences so that we're not spending all day long doing hard physical labor and then exhausted at the end. So it's something that Gopi Krishna pointed out. That's why we've been provided with those advances.
People need to find their own answers, though. Not, here's my answer, this fits universally for everyone. It has to be their purpose, not what I tell them their purpose should be. Eventually, everyone will find the same purpose, but there's many steps to get to that place.
We're not going to pass enough laws to make people do something that they don't want to do. And that is the other reason why Gopi Krishna wanted science to investigate. Of course, he was confident that they would validate the process in some way, or they would find something would be different that would change people's ideas. And that once that happened, people would realize that having this experience, even for 10 seconds, is more than all the money in the world. It means nothing. And that's why, historically, Buddha was a king, right? You just threw it, gave it away. Left it, didn't need it. There's stories in the newspaper now of millionaires, multimillionaires, just donating their money away because their life is empty. It's empty because this component is missing from it. And so I would wish everyone, that there would be stadiums where, how people go to a sporting event now to watch. Well, instead of watching a sporting event, you'd be able to see somebody have this experience and have the joy from it. And that joy, to a certain degree, of course, would spread. And then people would realize, well, gee, maybe I can do it. The downside is there's no shortcuts and there's no guarantee. But still, it's certainly worth, to me, it's going to make the world a better place irregardless.
We are co-creating our life with an energy that is so much wiser than we are. We've let go of control. We're not trying to control our life anymore. This energy is moving us through life. And I really feel like my journey has been a constant learning how to let go and let this energy guide me to become who I am now. What I found was that I was capable of writing. I never knew I was a writer. I started writing about all this, and I was getting published in nursing journals and respiratory therapy journals while I was still a student. I wound up going to Connecticut and learning all about psychiatric research, and I was able to interview near-death experiences for 6 years about Kundalini. And that's been my life, and then I met my now husband. So everything unfolded. I was terrified when I left, I really was, but I knew I had to do it. I had to save my soul. We have a wonderful relationship now, and I have a wonderful relationship with my kids, and I have a wonderful husband. So yeah, there were some scary years there, but boy, has it all been worth it. I'd do it all over again.
I found a way to open up to this energy and develop it in a safe way. It's been from dawn to midnight of constant spiritual work. It's energy work. Well, ultimately, and maybe this is my ego talking, but enlightenment is the goal of this earth plane, and that's where I want to be. I may not get here this lifetime, but as far as I can get is my goal. So if she comes knocking, open the door.
Divinity has no limitations inside of the material universe. Its abundance is without measure. And it is into this abundance of love, joy, opportunity, and creation that we travel, as it is opened to us when we take our first steps off the threshold of light. Kundalini forms the bridge that one walks to and from in living a life that is exalted and earthbound at the same time. It is very important to come into our divine expression and acceptance of Kundalini from the aspect of our core self. Yes, the actual you that you are, the essence of your personhood. This would include the validation of the you that you are, the sex, the looks, all of the descriptors of you. And from this honest understanding, we take into account the brutalities of life that have been experienced. We accept and realize the lessons of these incursions and sculptings into and of our soul, and we move into the understanding that we are still who we are. We are still that divine truth made manifest on this and in the many worlds. What have you adopted and internalized as part of a coping strategy? How have you been forced into a mold that is not you? Where are you?